Thank you. Thank you very much, John, for introducing me, and thank you to all the participants for joining us today. My presentation today is going to be quite dense, but I hope it's a good thing we have this like pretty the first thing. But yeah, so hello, Yaboi from the Micronesian Center for Sustainable Transport, based in Majuro, which is the capital city of the Marshall Islands. So the Marshall Islands and the growing alliance of small island states has a profile for our work at the IMO, where we are at the forefront of efforts to design and implement a global and equitable transition for international shipping. But our efforts to decarbonize our domestic shipping fleets is less well recognized. So in 2020, RMI committed in its updated nationally determined contribution, or NDC, to targets of 40% reduction by 2030 and 100% by 2050. Highly ambitious though these targets are, but with the right financing and the right technologies, it is achievable. The Marshall Islands is the co-chair alongside Fiji. Thank you. Yeah, so the Marshall Islands, alongside Fiji, co-chairs the Pacific Blue Shipping Partnership. It's a bold initiative to catalyze a transition in domestic shipping in our Pacific Island states. And it's a call for an immediate investment of $500 million to kickstart a shift to non-GHG emitting ships at speed and scale. We expect a significant GCF application to be the cornerstone of that initiative. So my task today is to put that investment call into perspective and to very briefly explain why it is needed. Then I want to outline for you the theory of change that we have been developing at MCST around the technology options that are available to us in the Pacific. So at the International Maritime Organization and other international fora, the Marshall Islands joins other Pacific and climate vulnerable voices in the call for all emitting sectors to take all possible action to reduce GHG emissions to the lowest possible limits. Along with the Solomon Islands, and now supported by a growing alliance of SIDS and LDCs, we are calling for a price on GHG emissions via a universal mandatory levy on all shipping fuel and an equitable transition that leaves no state behind. International shipping is now poised on the cusp of its greatest investment opportunity ever. A truly trillions of dollars transition that could see shipping move to new ships, new engines, new operational practices, and new fuels in a single generation. And if small voices speak loudly now, it can also unlock significant and realistic revenues to enable an equitable transition. The next slide, please. Our domestic shipping scenario in the Pacific is not a healthy one. As a maritime atoll, island and archipelagic nations, shipping is for us as railways, bridges, and freeways are for most countries. It is our absolute lifeline. We are entirely reliant on international shipping for all our energy, most of our food, and all manufactured products. Our domestic shipping is the only way of maintaining connectivity in island nations with EEZs measured in millions of square miles. Our maritime countries have the world's highest transport connectivity prices, the longest routes, and the narrowest economies. We are, essentially micro communities with minimal trading capacity. Our domestic shipping services are inadequate and substandard, except on the most profitable routes. The unfortunate reality for our unique maritime geographies is that while shipping is an essential social need, it simply doesn't have a workable business case. We are trapped in a vicious cycle where no investment and insurance capacity means we are reliant on either old, imported end-of-life or donated aid vessels. We also have highly limited maintenance capacity and a rundown and undervalued labor force, requiring increasing state subsidization for basic service connectivity. It's not a new problem. In fact, the UN SCAP well captured it in this flow diagram more than a decade ago, and it's even more true today. Our biggest task now is to transition away from our chronic fuel dependency and still provide basic shipping services to our far-flung communities. If we don't, we will be trapped in spiraling costs for outmoded or out of outdated fossil fuels and dinosaur technologies. Climate financing offers a rare silver lining to the climate crisis, a once in a generation opportunity to transition to better, cleaner, safer, and more appropriate shipping. There are two basic questions that we need to answer. Firstly, like what are the technologies and knowledge we need to acquire? What type of ship and fuels and operations will work for our specific needs? Second question is, how do we finance this now essential shift from fossil fuel powered shipping to alternatives in a single generation? It will require greater financial investment than any previously in the Pacific's history, and certainly greater than any state has gone through since independence. Our initial estimates put it north of $10 billion for six-pack plus countries over the next 25 years. I'm not going to attempt the financing question today. That is a subject for another Talanoa. Today, we are focused on the technology. What I will say is that there is increasing potential for the IMO GHG negotiations to realize real investment to address this exact issue. If many small voices speak loudly in the current IMO negotiations, and the earliest we should see realistic revenue flows is not until 2028 at the earliest. So potentially good news on the horizon, but not here for us today. And we need a pathway to kickstart this transition now. The next slide, please. We have been working on a solution. The PBSP, or the Pacific Blue Shipping Partnership, is the result of a decade-long locally situated research. It is a country-led investment call for a minimum of $500 million in largely no regrets financing to catalyze a domestic technology transition in a collective of Pacific countries. So today I'm going to discuss the theory of change that we have built to support the technology aspect of the PBSP. But before I do that, let me put the technology transition into its proper context. Firstly, the needed transition from fossil fuel dependency to alternatives in one generation in a sector that simply is not a priority for most bilateral partners is greater than anything our Pacific states have ever attempted before, and a greater cost than our countries can afford to pay. But the urgency of the climate change crisis means that we have no choice but to attempt it.
Marlene. Marlene.
Excuse me.
Hello.
Apologies, my telephone is right next to me. So the technology transition requires a complete technology revolution. So this requires a complete technology revolution in our domestic shipping operations. But this includes fuels that are not yet at market. But the challenge ahead is not about just technology transition. For the first part of our journey, we are reasonably certain that we have available technologies we can start with. Importantly, there are systemic financing and policy barriers that need to be addressed. Implementing the PBSP will require a paradigm shift in program delivery, in governance, and in how we use climate financing. It will not be achieved with a project-by-project approach. So now the next slide, please. So global shipping is embarking on its greatest technology revolution since the invention of the steam-driven screw. Around the world, a range of technologies are being researched, developed, and increasingly deployed. New ships, new motors, and new energy management, new fuels. Each week, we have new announcements from first movers and market innovators. Obviously, these technologies are all at different levels of technical readiness. Some are at market and others are only at concept stage. But almost all global research is focused on the needs of large shipping and trading economies, and very little work has focused on the Pacific scale, like for the Pacific context. For the Pacific, the transition will not be a simple process of scaling down internationally proven solutions and applying them at Pacific scale. Pacific domestic vessels must service extremely thin and long routes. They must be small in size, given the transport demand, but able to operate as a full blue water craft to extreme weather conditions and budgeted within the constraints of small Pacific Island economies and labor markets. We are far from any servicing centers and have minimal maintenance and fleet support capacity. So our research shows that the domestic operating scenario is sufficiently unique to warrant development of a bespoke theory of change. Of all the options available to the rest of the world, some are at level of technical readiness that makes them viable candidates for us to consider for immediate deployment today. We have done the initial work on identifying which of these technologies will be of most value in a domestic shipping scenario, but there is still a lot of work to do. The next slide, please. Research to support the implementation of PBSB has been ongoing for a decade. The first and hardest job was simply to get the issues visible in the policy space. For a multitude of reasons, shipping has lagged behind every other energy and emission emitting sector. While we have poured billions into solar panels and renewable electric projects in the past decade, investment in our domestic shipping transition has yet to happen. The green timeline shows that the various enabling policy milestones that we have now put in place, from the UN Samoa Pathway in 2014, all the way to inclusion in our updated NDCs, there is now finally general recognition that we must take on this hard to abate sector. At national level in RMI and in Fiji, we have set targets at 40% by 2030 and 100% by 2050. Our research is that the initial 40% savings are available in the short term from a basket of available policy, operational, and technology measures. Sufficient knowledge is held to move now to a portfolio of coordinated proof of concept trials of identified lead technologies, including new build and retrofits. Next slide, please. We have also identified and have been researching a range of technologies that are not yet mature candidates for Pacific domestic deployment. Several of these have strong potential to prove to be game changers if the technology is successfully brought to market in the future. Wing ships, electric tugboats, foiling cargo craft, fuel cell propulsion, electrofuels. So these are some of the technologies that are moving at speed, but they currently do not fit the Pacific scenarios, not yet. But with these technologies, we have put them in the shelf of future potential. We continue to build research partnerships with such technology developers and to monitor and collaborate on their development. For example, we have done this with Flettner rotor technology with leading innovators in Germany, and with wing ships and OTEC, or Ocean Thermal Energy Conversion technology, in Korea. Next slide, please. The PBSB is a catalyst for a program of ongoing work, and it is not a project. It's not just a project. It is about building a long-term transition, and as such will require upfront and real commitment. We have identified 4 foundation measures that are elemental investments, and we need to invest from the outset to build this program to build this program on. The first and most critical is research and education. It is essential to build long-term, retained, and in-country capacity and is required from across the sector and from cadet sailors to ministers. Next slide, please. Maintenance and slipway capacity is the second foundation. Slipways are far and few between, and most capacity is aged and in poor repair. Many countries don't have any slipways. In Vanuatu last year, the Maritime Safety Authority gave permissions to 80 ships to careen on the beach for essential repairs because there is no in-country capacity. Having to move our ships thousands of miles to get to a few old and end-of-service life slipways is not efficient. Transitioning our shipping and maintaining our shipping must go hand in hand and be planned early. Investment in new and high-quality technologies or incentives to improve operational efficiency will be largely pointless without the capacity to install, service, and maintain vessels in region. The issues of lack of next slide, please. Apologies. The issues of lack of accurate, reliable data for our sector in the Pacific are legend. How will we know if we are successful without the data? We need to know what our shipping emissions footprint is today if we are to measure our reduction over time, especially if we want to earn carbon credits for doing so. Data includes the capacity to acquire, analyze, maintain, and store. Capacity includes the cost of training and retraining skilled personnel. It is our third foundation measure. Through our international research network, we have begun to plug some of these data gaps and are now beginning to combine shipping data at national, regional, and international levels with trade data. But there is a long way to go, and we must invest in this foundation measure from the beginning. Next slide, please. All of this requires a skilled and maintained public and private sector capacity. The transition requires the capacity of our maritime institutions, such as the Ministries for Transport, Maritime Safety Authorities, Ports Authorities, and training institutions. Our government maritime services are already heavily strained. Despite our small size, we still need to maintain all the regulatory and governance functions that a large economy does. Our human resource is essential to this transition, and it cannot happen without it. We need to value, upskill, and retain a competent modern maritime workforce across the sector if we are to be successful. Next slide, please. With our foundation measures in place, then the period between now and 2030 is mapped out with 1, ongoing investment in our human capacity. Second, a coordinated portfolio of designs and technologies and for proof of concept trials. We need to build a fleet of vessels across a group of countries to prove that these technologies work and are effective. Thirdly, an active research and development program for less proven measures. And finally, we need ongoing and technology transfer with our international partners. Next slide, please. So we're nearing the conclusion. So with adequate and appropriate investment, the initial 40% of Pacific NDC targets are achievable with available policy, operational, and technology measures. The first proof of concept new build ship, which is the Juranai, which we received recently from Korea, which is a 48-meter general purpose ship for the Marshall Islands Shipping Corporation, is targeting 80% efficiency. A range of vessel types is needed at different scales across our group of countries. And so it becomes a process of rinse and repeat, with the results of each proven technology trials available from across the collective. Each country will be supporting its neighbors. This gets us a long way down the track toward full decarbonization. Moving past this, achieving full decarbonization will ultimately require access to alternative fuels and technologies that are not yet at market. The right choice of such alternatives for Pacific deployment is far from clear. Determining which future fuel the Pacific will adopt is going to be one of the biggest economic decisions that this generation of politicians will have to make. Ongoing investment in research, development, and deployment will be essential to determine appropriate Pacific pathways. However, there is no technology barrier to us starting now. As I said at the beginning, and I hope this answers the first question that is going to be posed, is what is the technology that we need for a paradigm shift? Financing for this is another question. So, colleagues, this brings us to the end of our presentation, and I look forward to hearing the reflections of the panelists and their thoughts on their reflection. Omotada, and thank you for your attention.